Okay, I think we're gonna go ahead and get started. It's a few minutes after 6. Um, I'm Haley Campbell. I'm a senior planner with the City of Springfield. Also here is Chelsea Hartman. She's another senior planner with the City of Springfield. Tonight we're discussing a workshop for housing in non-residential areas, code amendments. So it's a pre-recorded presentation. I'm going to start it in just a minute. So I'm going to be sharing my screen. We're going to hold all questions until the end of the presentation, and then we'll open it up for anybody in the audience who has some questions, has some feedback, or just wants to get in contact with us to ask questions later. All right, Chelsea, let's hope all our technical difficulties are worked out.
Yep.
Hello, and thank you for attending this workshop to discuss the Housing in Non-Residential Areas Code Amendments. My name is Haley Campbell. I'm a senior planner with the City of Springfield and the project manager for this code amendment project. Also with me is Chelsea Hartman, senior planner. In a minute, we will start the presentation. As this workshop is pre-recorded, we ask that you mute yourselves and hold all questions until the end. We have set aside 20 to 30 minutes for Q&A. In 2023, the Oregon legislature made efforts to address the state's housing crisis with new laws and $1.2 billion in additional spending on housing and homelessness. On any given night in 2022, at least 18,000 Oregonians were homeless, and state analysts predict Oregon needs to build at least 500,000 homes over the next 2 decades to keep up with demand. The legislature passed several bills that have prompted the following housing opportunities in non-residential areas amendments to the Springfield Code. The first is House Bill 2984, Commercial to Residential Building Conversions, which took effect January 1, 2024. The bill requires local governments to allow conversion of a building from commercial to residential use without requiring a zone change or conditional use permit, as long as the land is not zoned for industrial use. The next is House Bill 3151, Manufactured Dwelling Parks on Non-Residential Lands. It took effect January 1, 2024. Manufactured housing makes up 8% of Oregon's total housing and 16% of the affordable housing stock, according to the American Community Survey data collected between 2013 and 2017. That's why House Bill 3151's major impact on Springfield is to allow manufactured dwelling parks serving households with incomes of 120% or less of area median income, or AMI, to be added to the bill's definition of affordable housing. The bill also adds property owned by a housing authority, manufactured dwelling park, nonprofit cooperative, or nonprofit corporation organized as a public benefit corporation whose primary purpose is the development of affordable housing to the list of properties where local government is required to allow income qualified housing. The last is House Bill 3395, Residential Use of Commercial Lands. It took effect June 30th, 2023. House Bill 3395 allows housing within commercial land use districts if it is affordable to households with incomes of 60% AMI or less, or for mixed-use structures with ground floor commercial with residential units that are affordable to moderate income households, or 80 to 120% AMI. The bill requires cities to apply the residential density level most comparable to the commercial density currently allowed in the land use district. You might be asking yourself, what is affordable housing, and why are staff using the term income qualified housing? To start, we thought it might be helpful to look at an example of the housing continuum. Often the phrase is used for unhoused and low-income populations, but the City of Eugene and the City of Springfield have expanded the use of the term to include moderate income and market rate housing. Thinking of housing as a continuum allows us to consider the metro area's diverse housing needs and the impact of supply and demand. If one portion of the continuum is missing or stressed, the available options for certain members of the community become limited, and the remaining areas experience more stress from increased demand. The continuum is broken up into 5 primary categories that range from community members experiencing homelessness without emergency shelter to those earning over 120% of the area median income. Areas of overlap exist between each defined bubble of affordability to demonstrate the transition from one bubble to another. Therefore, staff renamed affordable housing to income-qualified housing to avoid confusion between the terms in the code. Across the U.S., housing costs are considered affordable if the monthly rent or mortgage on a property add up to no more than 30% of gross household earnings. Income-qualified housing, on the other hand, encompasses housing that is specifically for households making 0 to 120% of the area median income in our development code. Area median income means the median income for the metropolitan area in which housing is located as determined by the Oregon Housing and Community Services Department and adjusted for household size based on information from the United States Department of Housing and Urban Development. The examples here are for an individual and a family of 4 from HUD's 2023 fiscal year. The median family income in Eugene Springfield is $89,100. So at 50% AMI for an individual, that person would make $29,550 per year, and for a family of 4 at 50% AMI would make $42,150. Some examples of income-qualified housing in Springfield include Fisher Village, the largest affordable housing project carried out by Habitat for Humanity of Central Lane County. It's a land trust with 6 2 to 3 bed tandem homes for sale to people with incomes 40 to 80% AMI and is currently under construction. Hayden Bridge Landing, a Homes for Good rental assistance demonstration to convert public housing subsidies to project-based vouchers. The project includes 70 1 to 3 bedroom units. 52 units are affordable to households at 50% AMI, and 17 units are affordable at 60% AMI for 20 years. And the Myrtlewood, a 4-story building consisting of 35 one-bedroom rental units, which are restricted to 50% AMI for 60 years. 4 units are for developmentally disabled individuals, and 4 are for households who have either serious mental illness, intellectual disability, or developmental disability. Next, we're going to address how we are implementing the House Bills 2984, 3151, and 3395 code changes. This project is a continuation of work related to a larger Springfield Development Code update project that has been ongoing since 2018, involving a phased plan to update the entire Springfield Development Code. Updating the Development Code to support efficient, timely, and clear development review is part of Springfield's housing strategy. This project specifically revised the code to 1. Address state law related to single-room occupancy. 2. Add the conversion of commercial to residential use requirements in House Bill 2984. 3. Make significant changes to Springfield Development Code 4.7.370 for income-qualified housing on property owned by religious nonprofits. 4. Make changes to Springfield Development Code 4.7.405 to implement bills related to income-qualified housing. And 5. Address other changes throughout the code, including significant changes to 4.7.100 for various districts, 4.7.375 through 4.7.385 for architectural design and multiple unit housing, and minimum development standards 5.15.110 and site plan review for multiple unit housing 5.17.110. House Bill 3395 established a density standard for single-room occupancy, or SRO units. The bill states that each local government shall allow the development of an SRO with up to 6 units on each lot or parcel, zoned to allow for the development of a detached single-family dwelling, and with the number of units consistent with the density standards of a lot or parcel zoned to allow for the development of residential dwellings with 5 or more units. Staff interpret this to mean that in the R1 district, a lot or parcel can contain up to 6 SRO units. In the R2 and R3 districts, where multiple unit dwellings are allowed, the density of SROs will match the density in the applicable district. To reflect these changes, the code amended the lot area, dimensions, and density standards in the residential districts and the definitions section. The next topic is in regards to the creation of the new section 4.7.215, conversion from commercial to residential use. House Bill 2984 requires local governments to allow conversion of a building from commercial to residential use without requiring a zone change or conditional use permit, as long as the land is not in an industrial district. To make the code clearer and easier to interpret, staff reorganized and amended Springfield Development Code 4.7.370 for income qualified housing on property owned by religious nonprofits. The title of the section was amended. Staff moved the definition of place of worship from this section to the definition section in 6.1.100 and cleaned up one error in the code. Substantial changes were made to 4.7405 for income qualified housing. Staff reorganized the standards in 4.7405 A through D to make the code clearer and easier to interpret, and to address House Bills 2984 and 3151. Staff created subsections E and F in response to House Bill 3395. Sections A and B address the purpose and applicability of income qualified housing. The rest of this section of code was amended as follows. For 4.7405C, staff amended the section by 1. Including a manufactured dwelling park that serves populations with incomes of 120% of the area median income within the definition of income qualified housing. 2. Including the addition of several income qualified housing owners, namely those owned by a nonprofit corporation organized as a public benefit corporation whose primary purpose is the development of income qualified housing, a housing authority, manufactured dwelling park nonprofit cooperative, or a utility provider who conveys property for one of the listed owners. And 3. Reorganizing existing code language into various subsections for clarity. For 4.7.405D, staff amended the section by 1. Creating a site suitability subsection, a development standards subsection, and a density and height in residential district subsection. 2. Addressing the lack of income qualified middle housing standards in 4.7.405. 3. Stating what the density standards are for development in non-residential districts. This amendment is not a requirement in the House bills, but the code does not currently have density and height standards in many districts that don't currently outright allow housing, including industrial districts, medical service districts, etc. Staff provided 3 options in the draft code and are seeking feedback from the public. The 3 options staff are seeking feedback on is for density and height for income qualified housing in non-residential districts. The first option would not apply any new or different density or height standards for income qualified housing in non-residential districts. Development would be limited by existing standards in the applicable district, e.g. height, setbacks, lot coverage, etc. The second option would apply the density and height of the R2 district. The density in the R2 district is 14 to 28 units per net acre, and the height is 50 feet maximum. The third option would apply the density and height of the R3 district. The density in the R3 district is 28 to 42 units per net acre, and there is no maximum height. At the end of the presentation, we will open the workshop up to the audience for discussion and questions on these options. To comply with House Bill 3395, staff amended 4.7.405E by 1. allowing income qualified housing in commercial districts and in mixed-use structures, provided they meet the area median income thresholds shown in the code. 2. Listing the land use districts that allow only commercial uses and not industrial uses, a requirement in the House bill, to be neighborhood commercial, community commercial, major retail commercial, general office, mixed-use commercial, Glenwood commercial mixed use, or Glenwood office mixed use districts. For 4.7405F, staff amended this section by 1. Creating a site suitability subsection for requirements where this type of housing is not permitted, and 2. Creating a standards and procedures subsection for this type of housing. A requirement in House Bill 3395 is to apply the most comparable residential density to the allowed commercial uses in the subject district. Staff are seeking feedback from the public on 2 options in the draft code. The first option applies the existing density standards of the residential districts to the commercial districts and references the existing density standards in the mixed-use commercial, Glenwood commercial mixed use, and Glenwood office mixed use districts. It also references the lot area, dimensions, coverage, setbacks, and height standards of the commercial districts. The development standards in the mixed-use commercial, Glenwood commercial mixed use, and Glenwood office mixed use are referenced and stay the same. Here is a table comparing the density, lot area dimensions, lot coverage, setbacks, and height standards for the first option. As the House bill requires staff to apply the most comparable residential density to the allowed commercial uses, staff reviewed the Springfield Comprehensive Plan land use element, which carried over plan designation descriptions from the Metro Plan for guidance. The Springfield Comprehensive Plan stated that the neighborhood commercial comparable density is the R1 district, that R2 and R3 density can be allowed in the major retail commercial and community commercial districts, and that the general office district is intended to be an office transition area between residential and more intense commercial in the community commercial and major retail commercial districts, so R2 density was applied. The densities in the mixed-use commercial, Glenwood commercial mixed use, and Glenwood office mixed use were kept the same. At the end of the presentation, we will open the workshop up to the audience for discussion and questions on this option. The second option contains minimum densities for commercial districts and the mixed-use commercial district when residential only and when part of a mixed-use development. There are no maximum densities in this section because neither the commercial districts nor mixed-use districts have a maximum density for residential. In the commercial districts and mixed-use commercial district, the mixed-use commercial district development standards apply. The development standards in the Glenwood commercial mixed use and Glenwood office mixed use are referenced and stay the same. Here is a table comparing the density, lot area dimensions, lot coverage, setbacks, and height standards for the second option. As the House bill requires staff to apply the most comparable residential density to the allowed commercial uses, staff reviewed the standards in the existing mixed-use residential and mixed-use commercial districts. The density standards in the existing mixed-use residential district were applied to the commercial districts and the mixed-use commercial district when building income-qualified housing under House Bill 3395. The development standards like lot area dimensions, lot coverage, setbacks, and height were taken from the existing mixed-use commercial district for the commercial districts and mixed-use commercial district. The development standards in the Glenwood commercial mixed use and Glenwood office mixed use are referenced and stay the same. At the end of the presentation, we will open the workshop up to the audience for discussion and questions on this option. Here is a table comparing the density, lot area dimensions, lot coverage, setbacks, and height standards for the Glenwood commercial mixed use and Glenwood office mixed use districts. These are the same standards in the existing code and are not subject to change. As stated previously, at the end of the presentation, we will open the workshop up to the audience for discussion and questions on the two provided options. Finally, we are going to address other related code changes identified by staff that are related to the housing in non-residential areas code amendments, but are not requirements in the House bills. A separate but related topic to the housing in non-residential areas code amendments were amendments to the standards in 4.7.100. Staff moved specific development standards from 4.7.100 that reference a particular land use district to that district. These amendments will make the code more user-friendly by listing standards that apply to a district in one place instead of needing to reference another chapter in the code. But what does this look like? A good example of this is the creation of Springfield Development Code 3.4.330 specific development standards in the Booth-Kelly Mixed-Use District. In the current development code, you can find public and private park standards for the Booth-Kelly Mixed-Use District in 4.7.200, residential uses in commercial districts in 4.7.210, and warehouse commercial retail and wholesale in 4.7.245. To make the code more user-friendly, staff moved these standards to the Booth-Kelly Mixed-Use District section of code in 3.4.330 and created sections specific to these types of uses. What other standards were moved from 4.7.100? Other standards that were moved from 4.7.100 led to 1. The creation of new 3.2.300 for commercial districts. 2. The creation of new 3.2.428 for industrial districts. 3. The creation of new 3.2.270 for the public land and open space district. 4. The amendment of 3.3.825 development standards for the urbanizable fringe overlay district. 5. The creation of new 4.7.330 public and private parks in residential districts as the standards in 4.7.200 public and private parks applied to residential districts. And 6. The creation of new 4.7.335 professional offices in residential districts as the standards in 4.7.190 professional offices apply to residential districts. The next item is changes to 4.7.375 through 4.7.385 for multiple unit housing. For consistency and clarity, staff moved the standards in 4.7.385B, building orientation, and C, building form, to 4.7.375 to match the clear and objective standards that already contain building orientation and building form standards in the current code. Staff amended 4.7.380 to clarify that multiple unit housing is allowed in other districts besides R2 and R3, and staff renumbered 4.7.385 following the removal of sections B and C that were moved to 4.7.375. Lastly, staff made amendments to 5.15.110 for minimum development standards and 5.17.110 for site plan review when building multiple unit housing. This included clarifying that the MDS process does not apply to new multiple unit housing. A site plan review or multiple unit housing review in 4.7.380 for the clear and objective tract would apply, and amending the site plan review applicability standards to clarify one incidence where a multiple unit housing site plan review is required. When an addition, expansion, or change of use is for a non-residential use in a land use district that is not residential and located within 50 feet of a residential land use district or residentially designated land. An exception to this has been provided when a multiple unit housing development can meet the clear and objective standards in 4.7.380. So what are the next steps? A Springfield Planning Commission work session is scheduled for March 19th. There, staff will present the draft code and any feedback from this workshop or communication with the project team to the commissioners. On April 2nd, the Springfield Planning Commission will hold a public hearing on these amendments. A recommendation could then be forwarded to the Springfield City Council and Lane County Board of Commissioners, who must co-adopt the amendments. We'd now like to revisit the draft code options presented in 4.7.405 and open the floor up to the audience for feedback as well as questions. If you would like to view the project webpage and documents, please visit springfieldoregonspeaks.org. And if you have questions for staff, please reach out to Haley Campbell or Chelsea Hartman, whose contact information is on the screen. In a minute, I will stop the recording. Thank you.
Okay. I'm going to exit the screen or exit what I'm sharing, and then we're going to go back in just a second. And we're going to go back to the first feedback option, and Chelsea's just going to be moderating. If you guys would like raise your hand, or if you do not know how to raise your hand, just unmute. Again, Chelsea's going to be moderating and calling on people to go ahead and ask questions. Okay, everybody can see my screen? Yes.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. The floor is yours. So this question that you're seeing on the screen was about the income qualified housing section, and it is we're asking for feedback on applying density and height to non-residential districts. So in our current code and what's allowed on the House bills, we allow income qualified housing in districts where we typically don't allow housing. So most of the time we think of housing or multiple unit housing in residential districts. Under the current code and the new code, we allow it in other districts like public land and open space, medical services, even our industrial districts. And in our current code, we don't have density standards for those districts because, again, we typically don't allow housing in those districts. So we're basically asking the public if they believe we should provide additional clarity to what we expect for density and height in those areas. The first option is not to apply any density or height besides what already exists in those districts. So it would usually be limited by the existing height or setbacks or lot coverage options in those districts. And then the second and third option apply either the R2 district density and height standards or the R3 district density and height standards.
Brooke.
Hi. So if I don't have a question, but I just have an opinion, that's like, okay. Okay. My opinion is that the third option is wonderful because I think we need more housing for income qualified people. And it looks like that would allow for the most efficient development of more housing for people.
Thanks.
Thank
And I
you.
think I saw, I don't know, Brooke, if you had other comments, but I think I saw Phil, you like popped your hand up maybe for a second and then it went back down. So I don't know if you had thoughts.
Yes, sorry, I thought it was still up. Yeah, question, I guess. So again, these standards and the work that you're doing is wholly applicable to income qualified housing. or it applies to both income qualified housing and to market rate housing? First
Excellent,
question.
excellent question. So, let's see if I can go forward without kind of losing my place. Great. So the next slide, this slide, 4.7405E, it is kind of a tricky clarification, because what we talked about, where we really consider affordable housing and income qualified housing, they're two very different things. Like affordable housing, most of the time we consider less than 30% of your income, right? That you spend per month on your mortgage or rental. That's what we consider affordable housing. In qualified housing, the state has now opened up that definition to be 0% area median income to over 120% of your area median income. So looking at this example where we expanded your opportunity to build technically income qualified housing in commercial districts or in mixed use structures, that 60% AMI or 80 to 120% AMI is more what we would consider moderate income housing. That mixed use structures, especially 80 to 120% AMI, is a much higher standard for income qualified housing than what we've typically provided. And then on the flip side, one of the other bills, 2984, allowed commercial to residential conversion. And in that bill, there are no requirements for your income. It is a straight, if you take a commercial building, let's say along our Main Street or one of our major corridors, and it's been vacant, it could be a former grocery store or restaurant, some business that has gone out of business, and you would like to convert it to a residential building, you can do that. There are some limitations on certain areas, but no requirements on income.
Go ahead, Phil.
Okay. Yeah. So I've got following up from that. So again, if you were doing other than a conversion, but you're building new, these standards only apply to income restricted housing, not to market rate development built new in a commercial or industrial or other zone. Otherwise, those kind of developments would be subject to current standards. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And then following up, I guess if you could go back to the other slide, we had the three options. And I guess just I'll make an observation or I would like to think that, just as Brooke mentioned about, we could use derelict or vacant land or whatever that's not being used for something else and put as many income qualified housing units as we could. So the third option I see is attractive. My only concern is just that if we were to make this a minimum density of 28 units per acre, would that in any way limit the ability of, let's just say there's some piece of property or somebody looking to develop this income qualified housing and they just aren't able or don't want to or whatever create as many units as 28? Would we, I don't want to make it a zero sum game like, oh gee, you just didn't have, you had 27, sorry Charlie, you can't do it, that kind of a thing. So that's where I would maybe err more on the side of leaving it as open as you could. So, and just letting kind of, as people are able to do it, if they can get to that third option, amazing. I don't know if there's a way to craft the code that way.
I don't know how to raise my hand, but I'm just weighing in quickly to say that I agree with both Brooke and Phil.
Okay, are there any other questions on this section, income qualified housing in non-residential districts? Otherwise, we're probably going to move on to the next feedback questions.
Not seeing any hands or comments that we haven't heard.
Okay. All right, we're going to move ahead. Okay. So this first option, is we're talking about applying existing density standards of the residential districts to the commercial districts, and referencing the existing density standards in the mixed use commercial, Glenwood commercial mixed use, and Glenwood office mixed use. It references the lot area, dimensions, coverage, setbacks, and height standards of the commercial districts, and the development standards in the mixed use commercial, Glenwood commercial mixed use, and Glenwood office mixed use. And actually, I'm going to go back to the previous slide for just a second. So just why are we doing this? Probably should have been a question that I answered initially. And it's a requirement in House Bill 3395 for new income qualified housing in those commercial districts or in a mixed use structure that we apply a comparable residential density to the allowed commercial uses. So that's why we're basically requesting feedback. And the first option that you're seeing on the screen is basically a comparison of our comprehensive plan land use element, where we were looking at how do we compare the commercial districts to our residential districts. So the neighborhood commercial district, we applied the R1 district standards. The community commercial district, we applied the R2 density standards. The major retail commercial, we applied the R3 district standards, and the general office, we applied the R2 district standards. And that is from our comprehensive plan, previously our metro plan. And so those standards were applied here for density. And then we also have, again, the lot area dimensions, lot coverage, setbacks, and height are the same as the commercial district standards. These things have not changed. They're in our current code. And then our mixed use commercial stayed the same. So whatever standards are in the mixed use commercial, again, for density, lot area dimensions, lot coverage, setbacks, and height stayed the same, as well as our Glenwood commercial mixed use and Glenwood office mixed use districts. I'm going to leave this table up. And again, I'm going to open it up for questions with Chelsea moderating. Anybody who has any questions about this?
And since it is a smaller group, if you are having trouble raising your hand, yeah, Phil, go ahead. But others, if you are having trouble, feel free to unmute, and that's a good signal.
Sorry to kind of keep asking the same question, but I am going to ask it more or less the same way. These two options, they are or are not applicable to non-income restricted or non-income qualified housing development. And I guess I would suggest, and I reserve the right to change my mind on this, but I would suggest that maybe you make this so that it is not exclusively applicable to income qualified. I know you need to do this to comply with these House bills that have been approved, but I would think you'd make it for all housing. I mean, if the whole game that we're after here is not only to promote income qualified housing, but all housing types and at all income levels, so that just we have more housing, then I would think whatever these two options that you ultimately land on, hopefully they apply to everything and not just income qualified. Does that make sense?
Good point, Phil. Unfortunately, in our current code, we do have restrictions on where you can build usually multiple unit housing in commercial districts or districts that aren't residential. If you're looking through our current code, we do restrict it usually to mixed use areas or mixed use designated areas. So it's basically, we're doing these amendments to comply with the House bills, as you mentioned. I think if we're going to open it up to additional areas, that will require additional amendments in the future. It's just kind of outside of our scope with these amendments. And just because also we're kind of on a time crunch, you might have heard in the very beginning of this presentation that these House bills actually took effect June of 2023 and January of 2024. So we're kind of playing catch up. We're trying to kind of get these amendments, I guess you could say, adopted as quickly as possible just to comply with the state, and so that you guys can start building this type of housing as soon as possible. So. Oh, and I guess I didn't answer your earlier question, Phil, that they are, again, what you're seeing on the screen is just limited to that income qualified housing. Now, again, what we would kind of consider income qualified housing, it is kind of changed, right? Like we're saying that income qualified housing can go up to like 80 to over 120% of area median income. And you're like, how could it go beyond 100% of the area median income? Well, that's just the new state's definition of what they consider income qualified housing because we have such a housing crisis. So hope that answered the first question too.
And one thing I'd add, I think that's an interesting idea of exploring how we allow housing in more areas in our city beyond just what the state is doing here with these House bills. So I am taking notes and captured that idea for eventually when we'll be working on our housing capacity analysis and production strategies. I think that will be something we'll need to look at is what does our code allow for housing now? And are there other barriers we can remove in the future when you look at the code more holistically? Go ahead. I don't know if it was Phil or Brooke that had. Brooke, do you want to go since we haven't heard from you in a little bit?
Sure. Yeah. There were 3 tables like this, right? This is just the first one. Okay. I'm just like trying to make sure I'm keeping track of where we're at. Sorry.
Yeah,
Go ahead, Phil.
Yeah, I'm sorry to hog the airtime here, but so again, I'm just going to make a suggestion that whatever one of these options, ultimately is landed upon, I think you could, without sort of upsetting the apple cart of not being able to comply with these state statutes, that if you went with a different way, and I'm looking ahead at option 2, which I think in my mind would maybe be preferable. So sorry to jump ahead, but I think especially for mixed use commercial, and I've kind of crabbed about this to city staff as it relates to project that I'm trying to develop that is not income restricted downtown in a mixed use commercial area. But these requirements that you have, and I think they would probably apply and be even more burdensome perhaps to an income restricted project. If you have to have 60% of the ground floor area be in commercial uses, I think that could be overly restrictive and not really warranted. So that's why I'm looking not at option 1, but at option 2 as being initially kind of maybe preferable. And I would
Great.
think that would apply to both income restricted and non-income restricted. And insofar as those standards would apply to all those districts, but it's the mixed use commercial piece, which there's a pretty big chunk of the community that this applies to. And that's why I think you would get a bigger bang for your buck by making this eligible to any and all incomes, whatever kind of housing development, and it would cover you for the obligations that you have to comply with state law, and it would comply to all of these different districts as is shown in option 2.
So great segue, Phil. Actually, so what we're seeing on the screen here, and so Phil was kind of just talking about the mixed use commercial districts where we do have that like minimum percentage of the development must be devoted to, is it residential, Phil? Is that correct, or commercial? I should know, but I don't. I apologize.
60% has to be in non-residential use, and then the city further restricts what counts and what doesn't count in that.
Okay, so that's in our mixed use commercial district. Actually, what you're seeing on the screen here for density, this was taken from our mixed use residential district. So I did not apply the mixed use commercial districts to income qualified housing in this instance. What you're seeing is the mixed use residential, and again, these are minimums. So I'm saying if you're building a residential structure within a commercial district, you have to build a minimum of 20 units. If you are doing a mixed use structure in a commercial district, a minimum of 12 units. There is no maximum. These are just minimums. And then I did slide in that last little clause that's in our existing mixed use residential district of if you're building less than 20 units per acre, then you have to include a minimum of 10% of the gross floor area in a non-residential use. And then again, the lot area dimensions, lot coverage, setbacks, and heights, that is taken from our commercial district, mixed use commercial districts. So lot area dimensions, coverage, setbacks, and height are from our mixed use commercial districts, those standards. So I changed up the density a little bit to open it up for, you can build more dense, and we're not requiring you to have a minimum percentage of the building be dedicated to a commercial use or dedicated to a residential use. We just want you to meet those minimum density requirements. Any questions about this? Now we kind of jumped ahead again to option 2, and I'll go back to the previous screen in case anybody just wants to see what I just said. Contains minimum densities for commercial and the mixed use commercial when you're building residential only or in part of a mixed use development. Again, no maximum densities in either the commercial district or mixed use districts. And then, or in our Glenwood commercial mixed use, Glenwood office mixed use districts. And then we applied the mixed use commercial development standards to the commercial district and the mixed use commercial district. And we kept the Glenwood commercial mixed use and the Glenwood office mixed use the same.
Brooke, sorry, it took me a minute.
No, it's okay. I'm gonna have to go pretty soon, so this might be like slightly out of place, but the Glenwood office use like area, like along the Franklin corridor, I think I saw in one of the tables, yeah, that it looked like the height. Oh no, that's the same. I'll make a comment because it might be like not a very informed comment because I don't think I've fully digested all the stuff that you shared today. But just thinking, like imagining what the Franklin corridor like could or should be and where those Glenwood office areas are, like I picture that those buildings are coming pretty close to the street and that they're relatively tall. And I think I saw a table in here that was suggesting that they were maybe more closely resembling like residential height. And I was like, no, but maybe I'm misinterpreting it. So my comment is that I would like specifically for the office, Glenwood office area, to have buildings like close to the streets with setback requirements, and then heights taller than like residential. But that might already be in here. And so apologies if I haven't fully digested it.
No, perfectly okay. So what you're seeing on our screen is you're seeing our setbacks here and then our height. So in the Glenwood, we just require a minimum of 2 stories or 20 feet for the height of any building. There is no maximum, but we do require step backs for when you go above your 4th story. So it's just kind of like almost like a ladder. You're stepping back feet the higher you go. So it kind of doesn't encroach down on the ground floor. And then again, our setbacks are about 10 feet maximum from any roadway. So those things are usually pretty limited in the Glenwood area.
Thank you.
Phil.
Just a question. Have you guys tested any of these with any particular real life locations and to see, you know, where it was done properly, where you aspire to do it just like that, or where it's been done as this code shows and it would somehow be not what you want?
Excellent question. So at this time, we have not, like I said, these House bills already took effect. So we're kind of playing catch up with trying to get them adopted. I guess the comparable density would, again, probably be the only thing that we would have kind of some leeway on about how we would kind of compare a commercial to residential or residential to commercial in some of these areas, again, where we typically, we don't allow them. Again, we're expanding the opportunities in all over the city. We're not saying it has to be designated as a mixed use district or a mixed use area. For income qualified housing, we're saying go crazy. We want you to build as much housing as you possibly can in these areas. So again, I think when we're comparing especially the first option that was on the screen, that is what we have in our comprehensive plan, where we spent some time previously looking at what is the comparable density in our commercial districts to the residential districts. That's what we have already adopted. The second option, again, was at staff's discretion, is just kind of trying to find a similar mixed use district density that we already have in our code, because we had to comply with that comparable density requirement, not creating a brand new one, because that would be outside of the scope of the House bills. If that answers the question. Okay, I am not hearing any other questions on the feedback. So does anybody else have any other questions about kind of the general consensus for the projects? Again, like what we said on the last slide, and let's see if I can scroll forward a little bit. So we are going to have our first Planning Commission work session on March 19th, and then the public hearing will be April 2nd. They may issue a recommendation on April 2nd, and then it will have to be co-adopted by Springfield City Council and the Lane County Board of Commissioners. That's tentatively scheduled for June, but things could be subject to change based on how much feedback or comments we get from the public. And then again, if you are looking for a draft of the code, a comparison of the charts that we provided in the PowerPoint, or a summary of all of these changes, they're up on Springfield Oregon Speaks on that main page on the right-hand side. There's some tabs for our projects that we're currently working on. This is one of the current projects. And you'll find all of those documents that I just mentioned on that page. You can also contact me, Haley Campbell, or Chelsea Hartman, who's moderating this presentation, with any questions. We're happy to answer them. And we'd love your feedback. We'd love your comments so that we can address how the community wants to see more income qualified housing. Okay, and with that, I'm going to stop sharing. Thank you, everybody, for attending. We really appreciate all of the questions and feedback we received. Again, we'd love it if you can attend some of our public hearings that are coming up for this item. Contact us with any questions, any feedback. We want to hear it. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Yep. Thank you.